On today's episode of the Locked On NHL podcast, our final two teams burning questions, including does Vegas have enough depth to get through the season? And did Winnipeg miss their window? All that and our playoff predictions for the Western Conference.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, everybody? Welcome in to another episode of the Locked On NHL podcast. We are your daily NHL podcast, and we are your team each and every day. We thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Today's episode of Locked On NHL is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. On today's episode of Locked On NHL, we finish our burning questions talking Vegas and Winnipeg, as well as laying down our playoff picks for the Western Conference. My name is Seth Toupal, host of Locked On Wild, and here with the other half of the Western Conference Tuesday show, JD Young of Locked On Sharks. And JD, it's here. The season has officially begun because we had the global series while the preseason was still going on.
Drives me nuts.
Yeah, we need to put a stop to that. I understand that they want to kind of cross-pollinate and keep people get people excited about the regular season before it actually starts. And they do this in other sports too. Major League Baseball does one of these. But you can have a little separation between preseason and regular season, give teams a chance to get their rosters in order. Yeah. And you can still make it a spectacle.
Yeah, or maybe you have your opening, we got the Panthers with their rings, the banner ceremony, and then the next morning, boom, let's start that. And then I know logistics of trying to get overseas and everything like that, but it's 2024. It's not it's the end of the world for these guys to, fly across the Atlantic Ocean. I mean, you look at West Coast teams coming east, it's not it's that much longer, right? It's doable. And especially the Devils and the Sabres, those are two East Coast teams. It doesn't make sense. Yeah, it'd be nice. Boom. Opening night, next morning. And then you could even do an all-day thing, where that's what you do. Opening on Friday night. Saturday, you just all day, starting 6, like how football, right? Where they have the London games, you start 6 a.m. Pacific time, and you're just playing all flipping day.
Yeah.
Don't you like that? Okay. Gary, give us a call.
Yeah. Small fee, minimal consulting fee for coming up with these ideas. Make the first game of the season. How about this for a blood boiler? Make the first game of the season be a Stanley Cup final rematch.
I love it.
So the team that lost has to watch the team that beat them get the rings, and they get to sit on that for the entirety of the season. And then
you spend the entire offseason just knowing that moment's coming. Just turn the dagger.
Yeah. I'm all about creating those narratives, those storylines that stick with you for the whole season. So that's how I would do it. And then you're exactly right. Global series in the mornings, since they're in different time zones, easy. Do those in the mornings and then just have games wall to wall.
Yep.
Easy. We fixed it.
Easy. Done.
Speaking of fixed it, the Vegas Golden Knights hoping to get to the postseason once again here this year. I got to tell you, I feel like the Pacific is going to be much more of a barn burner, and we'll talk about that at the end of the show. I feel like there are going to be fewer postseason teams from the Pacific than there are the Central, which is going to put way more pressure on everybody in the Pacific. But Vegas has been one of the best teams in the Pacific Division over the last few years. They obviously have a Stanley Cup to show for it. The big question is one that I think we have been keeping an eye on for the last few seasons, and this ties in, this is a nice 1-2 punch from both of us here, is at what point do things start to catch up with the Vegas Golden Knights? All the creative cap tightrope walking they've done, all of the sending picks and prospects. All of the mortgaging of assets to win now. At what point does that come back to bite the Vegas Golden Knights? It may not be this year, but what all of these what this like razor's edge cap situation does for the Vegas Golden Knights as well, it tests the depth, because you've got a bunch of top level guys on this roster, and that eats up a lot of the money. And so the big one, to kind of piggyback off of when will this catch up to them, is, does Vegas have enough depth to be able to get through the season and go on a postseason run again this year?
Yeah, I mean, you look at kind of how this roster is broken down, especially they've spent a lot of money, on their star players, right? Jack Eichel making $10 million, Mark Stone making $9.5 Hurdles, on a solid contract because the Sharks are retaining a little bit that. Pietrangelo, they've spent a lot of money on a lot of different guys. But like you said, like you try to fill out the rest of your roster on cheap contracts, usually via guys that you kind of draft to develop. The problem is the Vegas hasn't been able to develop anyway because they keep drafting or trading away their draft picks. And that's where I think you start to worry, is like, who can step up, especially like on the wings. And I know Pavel Dorofeev had a really nice preseason. He scored a hat trick against the Sharks, kind of AHL team there, as they lost that game. But like, can he do it for 82 games? Right.
Yeah.
Alexander Holtz, who kind of flamed out with the Devils, right? We've been kind of waiting for him to kind of take that leap. They signed Tanner Pearson to a, 32 years old. They signed him to a vetman contract after PTO. This team is very much going to have to rely on some of these maybe unknown guys, these young guys, to try to step in and fill the void. Sometimes some of these guys hit and sometimes some of these guys don't. And then you have guys like Brandon Brisson, who we kind of waiting for him to make the leap and become an everyday NHL player. And it just hasn't really happened for him. So, and we know, Mark Stone, not the healthiest of dudes. February-ish, he can kind of schedule some time off, and we'll see him in April. And Tomas Hertl, who I love, but same thing, has had knee issues. And like, if you start to lose some of these guys, and maybe it's just that the Pacific is kind of not the best, that they're going to just kind of get into the playoffs and see what can happen there. And that solid strategy, just get in the playoffs, be healthy then. But I do worry if this team, like if Stone and Eichel are both out, which is definitely in the world of possibilities. Yeah. Can this team muster up enough offense, or are they just have to win every game 1-0?
So here are the numbers. Here are the numbers to consider. Jack Eichel, the last 3 seasons, has played 34 games back in 2021, 2022. He played 67 in 2022, 2023, and he played 63 in 2023, 2024. Now, insanely productive in those 63 games, which underscores, underscores his importance. And so if he is somewhere between 60 to 65 games this year, who in that bottom 6 is going to help pick up that production? Mark Stone, it's the same thing. 2021, 2022, he played 37 games. 22, 23, he played 43. And this past season, he played in 56. So if he's between 50 and 60, who is picking up the slack in the other 20-plus games of the season? Tomas Hertl has, I think, been the most healthy of the bunch up until this past season. He played 79 games in 22-23 and 82 the year before that.
That
And
season,
so,
it was two for suspension and one for the birth of his child. So,
okay, so
it
he
wasn't even
no
it
injury.
wasn't even injury. Yep.
So he is probably the one that you worry least about with the injuries up until what happens this past year. But again, that's the question: is if those guys are out of the lineup, who's going to slot in and fill that spot? And that's not even talking defensively too. It's an older D-core. If you lose one of those guys in that mix, what do you do? Like if you lose a Noah Hannafin or an Alex Pietrangelo or even like a Shea Theodore, like if you lose one of those guys, who is going to step in and fill that spot?
Yeah, like you look at their guys who's in the AHL. None of those guys really kind of a lot of confidence in there, and maybe it's the system is so good that they can kind of overcome it. But yeah, you do wonder, and as a longtime Sharks fan, I saw this with the Sharks, right? It's like at some point the attrition starts to happen, and it can come quickly. Not that I don't think this year's the year for Vegas. Just because, again, we'll get to the Pacific here in a little bit, but I think they have enough star power, and I think they'll be able to overcome it. But I think too in goal, like Aiden Hill has had issues staying healthy as well.
Yeah.
I know Robin Lehner's whatever happened with that situation, and somehow Vegas got off with that, and I think Ottawa is going to lose another first round pick because of it. But like Aiden Hill and Ilya Samsonov, like doesn't strike you the most confidence in the world, and then it's the same thing. Like they just have a kind of a bunch. They have Kira Schmid, who's had some moments here and there, but like nobody kind of strikes confidence if one of those guys goes down. So this team is very, very top heavy, and there's a world where you can see this team be very, very good. But there's also a world where this team, injuries do happen in this sport. So
I literally just watched one of those seasons where you just crumble under the weight of a mass of injuries. It does happen. It happens far more frequently than it does that teams stay healthy.
Yep.
So the depth will be tested for this Vegas Golden Knights team. We're going to move next to the Winnipeg Jets, who made a big change, not necessarily in the lineup, but behind the bench. And we'll talk about how big of an effect that will have on Winnipeg this season as we continue today's episode of Locked On NHL after this. Today's episode of Locked On NHL is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. If you are a New York Jets fan, you maybe took the second half for your Jets to try to get back into the game against the Minnesota Vikings. Didn't happen. Maybe you had the over between Cincinnati and Baltimore. That definitely hit. Best part about it, though, is whether you are winning or losing, FanDuel is going to help you with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. You could have had the Steelers, who were winning up until the last second in Sunday Night Football. If you had the Steelers winning, don't worry. You still get $200 in bonus bets. Like I said, Baltimore, Cincinnati over. If you had that, you won, and you get $200 in bonus bets. So all you have to do is go to FanDuel.com and get started with this great deal today. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked On NHL. Once again, we are your team each and every day, and we thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen each and every day. Make sure to stick with us throughout the rest of the week because the season is here. And you're going to want the intel on all of your favorite teams, whether it be the Jeremy Swayman contract, whether it be the Global Series, whether it be the New Jersey Devils trolling the absolute bejesus out of the Buffalo Sabres.
Poor Sabres.
That was a aggressive troll by the Devils, but I support it and I applaud it. It's just one of those things that, social media admins, they get competitive too. It's not just the team. They get competitive out there on the keyboard. And so you can hear about everything going on in the NHL by making sure that you listen to Locked On NHL each and every day. All right, let's get to the burning questions for the Winnipeg Jets. It's interesting because I think Winnipeg is the most commonly picked team to slip out of the top four in the Central. At least what I've heard of the Central Division playoff hopefuls show that aired on those shows earlier here in the offseason. Winnipeg was the consensus, like, hey, we think this team is going to fall out of contention. Mm-hmm. So I guess my question is, do we see any sort of a dip in performance by Winnipeg because they now are going in a different direction? Rick Bowness retired. They are going to one of his assistants, Scott Arniel. Do we see any sort of a difference or a slip in performance with a regime change here for the Jets?
This Jets team it confuses me because it's like it felt like, last year going into the off season, it was like, is this a time where this thing's going to blow up, right? Because you had to decide if you're going to re-sign Hellebuck, and then they were like, let's just bring it back. So they run it back. Everything's fine, but they were a very good team last year. Played a very solid defense, and then they got to the playoffs and they fell apart. This year, it's like they lost. You see, again, that attrition thing, right? You're seeing some pieces kind of getting taken away. They lost like a guy like Brendan Dillon, who not the most sexy defenseman, but is a very solid defenseman and et cetera. We know kind of Brendan Dillon and what he brings, but they changed the coach here, and maybe they're just like new voice, new us, new year. And let's see if some of these young guys can start to, kind of add and pull their weight. But then you also had the Cole Perfetti thing all off season, hanging over it. And it's just, I don't like the vibes in Winnipeg. But again, you look at the roster and there's a lot of guys you're like, okay, yeah, that guy's good. That guy's good. And of course you have Connor Hellebuck, who's one of the best goalies in the world, and he covers a lot of flaws for this team. So I don't know, man. I have no idea what to think of it as Winnipeg Jets team. They're the team where you could tell me anything, and I'd be like, yeah, I could see that. You'd be like, yeah, they end up picking the top 10 because Connor Hellebuck got hurt and this thing just fell apart, or this team made a run to the Western Conference Finals, and I would be like, okay, I could see that.
Yeah, it is. It feels like they had a similar offseason to the one that the Minnesota Wild had, because they have a lot of money locked in to their key guys. They have more money that they are going to be allocating as quickly as this offseason, with Cole Perfetti and with all that going on. And they've got other key pieces on this team that are unrestricted free agents after the season is done, and you're going to have to make some major decisions on those guys. Like Neil Pionk is an unrestricted free agent at the end of the season, and so it feels like a Jets team that was hamstrung a little bit by all the money that they have tied up to key guys. And they feel like a team that is going to really need somebody to step up, especially offensively. You've got Mark Scheifele, you've got Kyle Connor, Nino Niederreiter, and you've got some guys like Gabe Vilardi had a really nice, sneaky, nice year. But again, it's the same thing. If any of those guys misses time, and Kyle Connor did, I think at points both of the last two seasons, who's going to step in? Because this is a team that is very much dictated by defense and goaltending.
Yep.
And so you need those top level guys to be the ones that are producing, because beyond that, there isn't a lot of production. And so if any of those guys miss big amounts of time, could be a struggle to score.
Yeah, you wonder how long, like a guy like Brad Lambert, who had a really nice season in the AHL, was kind of one of the last guys to be sent back down to the AHL. You wonder how long they wait, especially if he starts the season hot and they struggle to score goals. But we've known how Winnipeg has kind of treated its young players and really forces them to kind of earn their way into a spot. But maybe new head coach, new philosophy. Spoiler, I still have them making the playoffs, but I don't feel great about it. Just because, again, like I worry that they're just going to be one of those teams that's like, well, we have Connor Hellebuck, and you just try to score more than 3 goals on him, and we'll just kind of go with that, because I feel like that's just going to be their strategy, is like, we're going to just try to, wear you down defensively and keep every game try to win every game 3-2, which is fine, but I think it just limits your ceiling so much, because if the defense falls apart, like you said, or if the goaltending, if Hellebuck goes from like the best goalie in the league to like the 5th best goalie, not that I'm saying it could happen. I think it just lowers your ceiling of what this team could actually be this year. So yeah, I'm not super excited about the Jets, unfortunately, but again, watch they make a run to the Western Conference Finals, and I do love Brad Lambert.
Well, Scott Arniel was an associate coach for the New York Rangers back in 2013, 2014, when they went to the Stanley Cup final, or the conference finals. It oddly doesn't specify. It just says lost in finals. But he has not been a head coach since 2011, 2012 with the Columbus Blue Jackets. And that was for half the season that year. He was a head coach for the Chicago Wolves in the AHL the next season, and then he's been an assistant ever since. And so, he's obviously somebody that's been around this Jets team the last 2 years. It'll be interesting to see, because it feels kind of like the Jets, everything came together for them last season, and it just wasn't enough.
Yep.
So
yeah, and again, they're just like, what do you do with this roster right now? So yeah, it is what it is with this team. That's kind of how it is.
Fight for the playoffs, and if not, then you just kind of scratch your head and wonder what happens. We'll see if Winnipeg is indeed one of the chosen playoff teams when we get to our Western Conference playoff picks to finish today's episode of Locked On NHL after this.
We're driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Indeed doesn't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites, according to a recent Indeed survey. So join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And listeners of this show get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
Final segment of today's episode of Locked On NHL. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen each and every day. Make sure to check out Locked On Fantasy Hockey. If you haven't done your fantasy draft yet, make sure to check out all of the great content at Locked On Fantasy Hockey. They'll make sure that you're ready to go so that you can win your league, because nobody likes to be in dead last. It's not fun. especially if your team just gets crushed by injuries and you're trying to scour the waiver wire and you end up picking players on the team that you cover that don't contribute a ton. And then you're like, this is my roster on a weekly basis. This is
name, Seth.
I will not. I will not. That's also why I don't do fantasy hockey anymore. I did it for one season and I was like, yeah, okay, I think I'm all right. But Locked On Fantasy Hockey can get you ready because I know there are those fantasy hockey diehards out there. They can get you ready. Speaking of ready, it is time to throw our playoff predictions out for the Western Conference. JD, who do you have as in from the West this year?
All right. Do you want to let's do division. We'll do divisions. So let's pick our 3 and then we'll do wild cards.
Sure.
So, all right. From the Central, I have Dallas winning the Central, followed by Colorado and Nashville securely in the playoffs there.
Yep.
So, all right.
I have,
Go ahead.
we'll go through yours and I'll offer up my tweaks.
So in the Pacific, I have Edmonton winning the Pacific, and then Vancouver and Vegas also firmly in. Pretty chalk.
Yeah, it feels good. So for the divisions, the only change that I had is I have Nashville number 2.
Nashville 2 with Colorado. The injuries in the depth on Colorado.
Yeah, I think so. I think they're obviously talented enough to get in, but I've been pretty my stance on Colorado has stayed pretty similar that they're just not the same Colorado team without those guys like Landeskog, like Nichushkin, and now if Arturi Lehkonen is injured too, that's a lot of scoring that's not in the lineup. So they're talented enough to still make the postseason, but I think Nashville is going to get number 2.
I worry with Nashville that maybe it takes them a little bit for the gel with so many new pieces kind of coming in.
Yeah.
So that's was my argument. I like this Colorado team. The core has been together for so long, and they're going to get some of these pieces back at some point. So that was kind of my if they can hang in there until they get some of these guys back. That's why I had them as number 2. And Nathan McKinnon is a psychopath. So.
Yeah, that's true. This might be a hot take, but I think there's going to be a bigger separation between 1 and 2 in the Central than there is between 3, 4, and 5. I think Dallas, because guess what Dallas has that a lot of these other teams don't, is they have the depth.
Yeah, they have star players and they have depth players. And even last year, they were really good. And they're Jason Robertson, didn't even have that great of a year. What if you have Jason Robertson just goes nuclear and puts up 100 points season? And then, Logan Stakeoven, who's a Calder potential, Wyatt Johnson is just insane too. I could see just Dallas just running away with this thing and it's over by mid-March. Yeah.
I think they will. But I think, Nashville and Colorado definitely in the top 3. As far as the Pacific goes, pretty much the exact same. I mean, Edmonton is just a wagon, and Vancouver, we talked about Vancouver as a team that's got, they've got some injury questions that are big to start the season.
The team's deep and good. Yeah.
Yeah, just like Dallas, they've got the depth, especially in forwards, to be able to withstand that. And then Vegas, Vegas is a team that it seems like is just they're like a robot manufacturing plant where somebody gets hurt and they just pull somebody else off the assembly line.
Crank them in there, they'll be fine.
So yeah. I think for the top 3, I think that's really nice.
All right. Wild cards. I went both Central. I have Winnipeg and Utah as the final wild card teams.
Ooh.
I thought about LA, but the Drew Doughty thing worries me. Mm-hmm. I know Quentin Byfield's prime to just go off this season, but I still don't like the goaltending on the Kings.
Not even a little bit.
Not even a little bit. Like I really like what Utah did when we talked about, like, the more we talked about them last was the last episode, and we like the way they rebuilt their defense. They have so many young players I think are about ready to explode. And that franchise just needs to shake the shackles of what was happening in the desert in the desert. And I think they're going to reward their new fans and old fans that came along with them. And I think Utah gets in. So
call me crazy, but I can't object. Maybe I swap the positioning, because I think so. I feel like Utah gave a nice little glimpse last year of what, if they could get that from their goaltending, they can be a team that can win consistently.
Yep.
But here's the optimist side. It's a substantially better defense than what they were throwing out there in front of Connor Ingram and Carl Vejmelka last year. And those Ingram especially had a fantastic run during the season. So you put a better defense in front of him.
Mm-hmm.
And as for Winnipeg, I think right now I can pretty confidently say that what is going to happen is just an absolute frenetic fight to the finish for Los Angeles, Seattle, Minnesota, St. Louis, and Winnipeg. Yep. They are all going to be fighting for that final spot.
Yep.
Which is just going to... I'm going to be fully bald, and this beard will be fully gray by the time the season is done. Like, I can already tell.
Why? But. So, okay. You have the same two wild card as others. Who was the other team you thought about the most of trying to put in? Because for me, it was LA. But like I said, I didn't like the goalie situation. I thought about the Blues for a little bit, but I don't know. I don't like their defense because it's old as dirt. I thought about the Wild, but I didn't want to sound homerish, even though I don't root for the Wild. But I think they're a year away with some of their young players to maybe kind of But anyway,
for me, it ultimately came down to, are we going to see these young players step into the lineup and take over? And with not having them in the postseason, kind of leads to no. But at what point do the Wild say, all right, let's get some of the younger guys in the lineup, or more of them? Because, Brock Faber, Mark Rossi, Matt Boldy, they're all young. I think a lot of times people just there's just this assumption that it's a roster of 39-year-olds. They've got one of those. They've got a couple of guys in the 30s. So obviously the point kind of rings true, but it's not like it's just a senior citizen center. But ultimately, I think Utah did what they needed to bolster in front of the goaltending. And Winnipeg, I think, if we get another season similar to what Connor Hellebuck did this last year, then I think that's good enough to get into the postseason, regardless of what the offense does.
They're going to win every game 3-2.
So
and get losing 5 games in the playoffs.
And Rob Blake will be fired the day after the season is done.
All right. Who represents the West?
The Dallas Stars.
Vancouver Canucks, baby. It's their time.
I'd be good with that.
It's their time. I think the Canucks, they're a goalie injury away from doing it last year. I think that team is too good. I think that team, and they get Demko back, even if he comes back, as long as he's back and fully and ready for the playoffs, I think that team is going to be really good. And I think Elias Pettersson is going to have this monster, just screw you season that we've been waiting for him. So, yeah, I think the Canucks represent the West.
I like it. Of course, time will tell. Just watch 3 of these teams not even be in it by the time we get to Thanksgiving.
We're talking about I can't wait for these Sharks Blackhawks Western Conference Finals that we were all looking forward to.
and your Western Conference leader at the end of 2024, the Chicago Blackhawks.
Yes.
No, it won't be that. I can be pretty confident in saying that based off how they've looked this preseason. But it's the beauty of the NHL season is that we can throw whatever we want out for guesses, and a lot of times it's going to be just something completely different that happens. So we appreciate having you along for the ride, and we will keep you up to date on all things Western Conference here as the season rolls along. So make sure to stay tuned to Locked On NHL so you don't miss out on any big breaking news, any crazy fights, any crazy goals. We got you covered. And you can find new episodes every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.